In December 1943, during World War II construction of the Alaska-Canada Highway, U.S. Army engineers encountered the Kushtaka, a shape-shifting entity from Tlingit folklore hunting soldiers in the Yukon wilderness. Technical Sergeant Carl Jensen and his unit faced a creature that mimicked human voices, sabotaged machinery, and took men from inside secured camps. With the help of Tlingit Corporal Joseph Blackwater and consecrated ammunition, they forced the ancient predator into a standstill, then negotiated the only treaty in U.S. military history with a cryptid entity. Some stories were never meant for official archives. They survive only when passed from one listener to the next. For more classified encounters, forgotten operations, and wars, history denies ever happened. Warborn stories is where they resurface. This is the classified story of how respect for Indigenous knowledge saved a construction project from becoming a frozen graveyard. The bulldozer sat 20 yards from where we'd parked it, its blade buried 3 feet into frozen earth at an angle no operator could achieve without flipping the entire machine. Technical Sergeant Carl Jensen stood in the pre-dawn darkness of the Yukon Territory, December 1943, studying the gouges in the permafrost while his breath crystallized in the -30 air. 12 years cutting timber in Minnesota had taught him to read signs in wilderness. But nothing in those northern forests had prepared him for what was hunting the Alcan highway construction zone. "Tracks again, Sarge." Private Raymond Burke's Detroit accent cut through the silence, his mittened hand pointing to depressions in the snow that led from the tree line to the disabled machine. Same as the Johnson Creek camp, same as mile marker 1147. Jensen knelt beside the nearest print, pulling his field knife to measure. 18 inches long, 7 wide at the ball, 5 distinct toe impressions. The depression suggested something weighing between 400 and 500 pounds, moving on 2 legs with a stride that exceeded any man's by half. He'd seen bear tracks his entire life. This wasn't bear. Third machine this week. Sergeant Howard Mitchell emerged from the survey tent, his Montana drawl tight with frustration. Corps of Engineers Command is threatening to pull our entire company if we can't secure the equipment. General Hogue wants this highway operational by spring, and we're burning through machinery faster than Jerry bombed the 8th Air Force. The body changed everything. They found PFC Thomas Hendricks at 0630 hours, 50 yards downriver from the main camp, wedged between ice shelves where the current had deposited him after 3 days missing. Jensen supervised the recovery, noting details that would never appear in the official report. The hypothermia was consistent with death by exposure, but Hendricks had been an experienced outdoorsman from Wyoming. His rifle lay on the riverbank, fully loaded, safety off. And his face, frozen in the moment of death, carried an expression Jensen had seen once before, on a logger who'd fallen into a sawmill blade while reaching for something that wasn't there. He walked into that water voluntarily. Corporal Joseph Blackwater spoke from behind Jensen's shoulder, his voice carrying the flat certainty of someone stating simple fact rather than theory. The Tlingit guide had been assigned to their unit in October when command realized the survey crews were mapping territory that hadn't seen white men since the Russian fur traders abandoned it in 1867. The Kushtaka called him, used a voice he knew, used a face he trusted. Jensen turned to face the corporal, whose dark eyes reflected 40 generations of surviving this landscape. "You got a better explanation for why a combat-trained soldier walks into a frozen river without his coat?" "I got the only explanation." Blackwater gestured toward the tree line, where the morning sun failed to penetrate the dense spruce forest. "Your people built this highway through Kushtaka territory. It doesn't want you here. It won't stop until you leave, or until enough of you die that the others run." "We're not running." Mitchell's response carried the automatic authority of a man who'd never questioned an order in 15 years of service. This is a strategic military installation. President Roosevelt himself authorized this project. Whatever's out there, bear, wolf, deserter gone crazy, we'll handle it with standard procedures. Blackwater's silence spoke louder than argument. Jensen watched the corporal's gaze track across the camp perimeter, reading something in the landscape that remained invisible to men raised in cities and farmland. The guide had tried to explain it the first week, how the Kushtaka wasn't an animal, wasn't even truly alive in the way white men understood the term. How it existed in the spaces between human and beast, between water and land, between the voice of your dead brother and the thing that wants to wear his face while it drowns you. The command briefing at 1400 hours brought together all section leaders in the heated operations tent. Captain Frank Hardesty presided from behind a folding table covered in survey maps, his West Point bearing undermined by the exhaustion lines around his eyes. 3 months commanding an engineering company in sub-zero wilderness had stripped away whatever parade ground polish he'd arrived with. Gentlemen, we have 1,700 miles of highway to complete before spring thaw. Hardesty's pointer tapped locations along the proposed route. Current estimates put us 6 weeks behind schedule. Equipment sabotage has cost us 4 bulldozers, 2 graders, and enough wire and explosives to suggest either enemy action or catastrophic supply chain failure. The FBI has cleared all personnel. No saboteurs, no sympathizers, no security breaches. Jensen raised his hand. Sir, request permission to establish armed night watches on all heavy equipment. 2-man teams, 4-hour rotations, standing orders to challenge and fire on any approach. Denied. Hardesty's response came too quickly, betraying pressure from higher command. We can't spare the manpower from construction duties, and General Hogue has expressly forbidden any discharge of weapons that might be interpreted as combat action on Canadian soil. Ottawa is already nervous about American military presence north of the border. We shoot at shadows, and this becomes a diplomatic incident. Then we're going to keep losing equipment. Mitchell's voice carried resignation rather than protest. And probably more men. The captain's jaw tightened. I'm aware of the tactical situation, Sergeant, but our orders are clear. Complete the highway, maintain diplomatic protocols, and handle any security concerns through proper military channels. That means documentation, evidence gathering, and coordination with Canadian authorities, not midnight firefights with whatever the hell is disabling our machines. The attack came at 0230 hours on December 18, under a moonless sky that turned the Yukon wilderness into an ocean of absolute darkness. Jensen was running perimeter check when he heard Burke scream, not the sharp yelp of surprise, but the sustained howl of a man confronting something his mind couldn't process. He covered the 100 yards to the equipment yard in 40 seconds, Garand rifle unslung, Mitchell and 2 privates converging from separate positions. Burke stood in front of Bulldozer 7, his flashlight beam illuminating nothing but falling snow and his own trembling hands. It was right there. Right fucking there. Looking at me through the windshield. What was? Jensen scanned the area, finding tracks, the same massive bipedal prints, fresh enough that snow hadn't yet filled their depressions. Burke, report. What did you see? My uncle. Burke's voice cracked on the words. My uncle Frank, who died in 38, standing there in the cab wearing his old tiger's jacket, waving at me to come closer. Then it smiled and its teeth were all wrong. And the thing hit them from the tree line at a speed nothing that size should possess. Jensen caught a glimpse, 8 feet tall, covered in dark matted fur that might have been hair, or might have been something else, arms too long and jointed in too many places. Then it was among them, and the night dissolved into chaos. Mitchell fired first, 3 rounds from his carbine at center mass. The bullet struck. Jensen heard the wet impact, but the creature didn't slow. It backhanded Mitchell into the bulldozer blade with enough force to crumple his helmet, then turned toward Burke with movements that suggested intelligence rather than animal rage. Jensen fired, worked the bolt, fired again. 5 rounds into the torso, 2 into what approximated a head. The thing staggered, made a sound like drowning and laughter combined, and lunged. He met it with his bayonet, driving 14 inches of steel into its abdomen. The blade went in clean, struck something solid, and stuck. Then the creature spoke, with Burke's voice, with Mitchell's voice, with Hendrix's voice, wet and gargling as if coming from underwater. "Come home, Carl. Come see what's waiting in the river. Come see what we've become." Its breath carried the smell of deep water and rotting salmon. Its eyes, too many of them, opening and closing in the wrong places across its face, reflected Jensen's flashlight beam with the dull copper gleam of old pennies. And its hands, reaching for his throat, possessed fingers that ended in something between human nails and fish hooks. He abandoned the rifle, drew his Colt .45, and emptied the magazine into its face from 3 inches away. 7 rounds of hardball ammunition at point-blank range. The creature's head snapped back, tissue and bone fragments spraying in the darkness, and it finally went down. Jensen stood over the body while the rest of the unit converged, their flashlight beams illuminating something that had no right to exist in any reasonable universe. As they watched, it began to change. The fur receded, the extra joints smoothed, the multiple eyes closed and vanished, leaving only 2 that might have passed for human if you didn't look too closely. Within 5 minutes, what lay in the snow resembled a large man, perhaps 7 feet tall, powerfully built, but no longer obviously inhuman. "Jesus Christ," Burke whispered it like a prayer or curse. "What the fuck is that?" "Kushtaka." Blackwater had appeared silently, as was his habit, studying the corpse with an expression that mixed satisfaction with profound unease. "The young one. The old one is still out there. The one that's been here since before the Russians. The one that remembers when this was all Tlingit land and the only voices in the forest were the right ones." Captain Hardesty ordered the corpse transported to the operations tent under armed guard, where it lay on a canvas tarp while the command staff struggled to reconcile official reality with the thing their men had killed. Jensen stood at attention beside Mitchell, concussed but functional, while the captain circled the body with the methodical precision of a man documenting evidence for a court-martial. "Technical Sergeant Jensen, your report states you fired 5 rounds from your M1 Garand at this individual before resorting to your sidearm." Hardesty's voice carried the careful neutrality of an officer protecting himself from future tribunals. "That's 12 total rounds to bring down 1 hostile. The Geneva Convention requires we classify any combatant as either civilian or military. Which is this?" "Neither, sir." Jensen kept his eyes forward, military discipline warring with the reality lying at his feet. "It's not human. Examine the bone structure, the teeth. Whatever that thing is, it didn't start life as a man. Everything starts as something, Sergeant." Hardesty knelt, lifting one of the corpse's hands with his own gloved fingers. The skin had taken on an ash-gray pallor in the warming tent, and something viscous, neither blood nor lymph, had begun seeping from the bullet wounds. "Dr. Patterson will conduct an autopsy at 0800 hours. Until then, this remains classified under operational security protocols. No one discusses what happened tonight. No one writes home about unusual wildlife. Is that understood?" "Sir, we need to discuss defensive protocols." Mitchell's Montana drawl had thickened with his concussion, each word carefully separated from the next. "Burke said this thing wore his dead uncle's face. Hendrix walked into that river because something called him with a familiar voice. If there are more of these, if they can make us see people we trust, standard perimeter security won't hold." Hardesty's expression suggested a man watching his career aspirations dissolve into the Yukon wilderness. "Corporal Blackwater, your people have folklore about these creatures, traditional methods of protection. I'm prepared to implement reasonable precautions that don't contradict military regulations." Blackwater's reasonable precautions began at dawn. Jensen watched the Tlingit Corporal move through the camp with deliberate purpose, carrying items that had no place in a U.S. Army Corps of Engineers installation: bundles of dried devil's club, copper wire twisted into specific patterns, small carved stones that predated European contact by centuries. At each piece of heavy equipment, Blackwater performed a ritual that took exactly 7 minutes, speaking in a language Jensen couldn't identify while marking patterns in the snow with red ochre. "He's warding the machines." Private Anthony Greco appeared beside Jensen, the New Jersey cook carrying 2 cups of coffee that steamed in the -20 morning air. "My nonna did something similar back in Trenton. Different symbols, same idea. Keep evil shit away from things you need to survive." "Your grandmother fought shape-shifting river monsters in New Jersey?" Jensen accepted the coffee, letting its heat penetrate his mittens. "She fought the Malakio, evil eye, curses, bad spirits that make good people do crazy things." Greco watched Blackwater work with the professional interest of one superstitious Catholic observing another tradition's magic. "My old man said it was peasant nonsense. Then my Uncle Joey drove his truck into the Delaware River for no reason, and Nona started carrying protection charms to work. Joey's truck was found 3 days later. Joey wasn't in it." The comparison hung in the frozen air between them. Across the camp, Blackwater completed his circuit and approached the operations tent where Mitchell was coordinating the morning work assignments. Jensen followed, bringing Greco and Burke with him. "The wards will hold against the young ones." Blackwater addressed Mitchell as if continuing an interrupted conversation. "But the old one, the one I smelled on the wind last night, those protections won't stop it. They'll slow it down, give your men time to run or fight, but they won't keep it out." "How many are there?" Mitchell's question carried the weight of tactical necessity. "How many of these things are we dealing with?" "In this territory, maybe 10, maybe 20. Most are young, 50, 100 years old. They're dangerous, but they're still learning, still making mistakes, like attacking soldiers with rifles." Blackwater's gaze moved to the distant tree line, where morning sunlight failed to penetrate the dense spruce forest. "The old one has been here since before the Russians, before the first white men came looking for furs and gold. It knows every trick, every trap, every weakness of the human mind, and it's angry." The pattern changed after they killed the young one. For 3 days, the equipment remained untouched. No sabotage, no tracks, no mysterious voices calling from the darkness. Work crews completed a full mile of roadbed, laying gravel and corduroying through muskeg that had swallowed survey stakes the previous week. Captain Hardesty began drafting commendations. Dr. Patterson's autopsy report classified the corpse as unidentified primate species, possibly Gigantopithecus descendant, and recommended immediate transfer to military intelligence for further study. Then, Private Eddie Kowalski disappeared during the 0200 perimeter check. They found his rifle at 0630, propped neatly against the supply tent with a full magazine and his helmet balanced on top. No tracks, no signs of struggle, no body. 6 hours later, Corporal Thomas Riley vanished from inside the mess tent while serving breakfast to 40 men. One moment he was ladling oatmeal, the next his ladle clattered to the floor and his station stood empty. 37 witnesses. No one saw him leave. Jensen assembled a tracking team at 1400 hours. Himself, Burke, Blackwater, and 3 volunteers from the survey crew who'd grown up hunting in mountain country. They moved into the forest, following the same trajectory both missing men's last positions suggested: weapons loaded, spacing maintained at 10-yard intervals. The tracks appeared 200 yards from camp, massive bipedal prints that dwarfed the ones they'd documented before. These depressions measured 22 inches long, 9 inches wide, pressed 6 inches deep into frozen earth that required a pickaxe to break. Whatever made them weighed considerably more than the creature they'd killed. "The old one." Blackwater's confirmation came in a whisper, his voice carrying a reverence that had nothing to do with respect and everything to do with survival instinct. It's showing us its territory, proving it can take our people whenever it wants. The trail led to the river, where ice shelves had begun forming as December temperatures dropped toward 40 below. The tracks approached the water's edge, then simply stopped. No emergence point, no sign of swimming or wading, just massive footprints that terminated at the frozen surface as if their maker had stepped into another dimension. It's underwater. Burke's observation carried the hollow tone of a man stating the impossible as fact. Living under the ice, moving through the current, coming up wherever it wants. Jensen studied the river with new understanding. The Alcan highway paralleled this waterway for 17 miles through their construction zone, 17 miles of access points where something amphibious could emerge, take personnel or equipment, and vanish back into depths that remained liquid even as surface ice thickened. They weren't defending a perimeter. They were building a road through a hunting ground with no effective barriers. We need to pull back. The admission tasted like career suicide, but Jensen forced the words out. Consolidate at the southern camps, wait for spring when the ice breaks and we can properly secure the riverbanks. General Hogue wants this highway operational by April. Mitchell had joined them, appearing from the tree line with the silent competence of a Montana hunter. Strategic Command considers it essential to defending Alaska from Japanese invasion. We retreat, and someone else gets sent to finish the job. Someone who won't have Blackwater's knowledge or our experience with these things. The old one took Sergeant Howard Mitchell on December 23rd during a supply run between camps. His Jeep was found overturned beside the frozen river, engine still running, transmission in gear. His body appeared 3 hours later, walking along the road toward the main camp in -30 temperature, wearing nothing but his uniform shirt. Jensen saw him first. Mitchell's characteristic gait, his Montana slouch, his habit of favoring his left leg where an old rodeo injury still bothered him in cold weather. He raised his hand in greeting before his conscious mind registered the wrongness. Mitchell walked with bare feet on ground that would cause frostbite in under 2 minutes. Mitchell's breath didn't crystallize in the air, and Mitchell's eyes. "All positions, hostile contact!" Jensen's shout triggered instant response across the camp. Burke grabbed his Garand. Greco emerged from the mess tent with a cleaver. Blackwater materialized with a rifle Jensen hadn't known he possessed. The thing wearing Mitchell's shape stopped 50 yards from the perimeter, its head tilting at an angle no human neck supported. When it spoke, Mitchell's voice emerged perfect in every detail, his accent, his cadence, his habit of clicking his tongue before completing a thought. "Camp's compromised, boys. Thing got me down by the river, but I fought free. Need medical attention and a hot meal in that order." It smiled Mitchell's smile, raised Mitchell's hands in a gesture of peaceful approach. "Jensen, tell these trigger-happy sons of bitches to stand down before someone makes a mistake we all regret." Jensen raised his Garand, sighting center mass at 40 yards. "Mitchell's left-handed. You're favoring the right. Mitchell's got a scar through his left eyebrow from a broken bottle in Billings, 38. Your face is smooth, and Mitchell never, ever calls me Jensen, always calls me by my first name when we're in the field." The thing's smile widened, revealing teeth that multiplied as they watched, human incisors giving way to rows of hooked fangs designed for gripping struggling prey underwater. "Smart. Your sergeant was smart too, tasted smart. Tasted like Montana winters and dead horses and a woman named Caroline who doesn't write anymore." It dropped Mitchell's shape like a discarded coat, expanding upward and outward until it stood 9 feet tall, covered in fur that seemed to drink the weak winter sunlight. Its arms hung to its knees, ending in hands that possessed thumbs on both sides and fingers that flexed with too many joints. And its face, Christ, its face cycled through every man they'd lost, every soldier who disappeared into the Yukon wilderness, every familiar feature twisted into a mockery of human expression. "This is Kushtaka country." Its voice became a chorus of the drowned and the taken, speaking with borrowed vocal cords that had never been designed for human speech. You built your road through our rivers. You poisoned our waters with your machines. You killed our young. Now we kill yours, one by one, until you leave or until none remain to remember why you came. The shooting started before it finished speaking. 7 rifles firing in coordinated discipline, 42 rounds in 15 seconds, concentrated fire at close range. The creature took the hits. Jensen watched bullets strike, watched tissue explode, watched bone fragments spray. But it didn't fall, didn't even stagger, just stood there absorbing their ammunition while its flesh knitted and reformed, while its eyes, dozens of them opening across its body, regarded them with something that might have been amusement. Then it charged. Blackwater's rifle fired once, a sound distinct from the military Garand's, deeper and older. The creature stopped mid-charge as if it had struck an invisible wall, its chest cavity suddenly sporting a wound that actually bled instead of sealing. The Tlingit Corporal worked his bolt with practiced efficiency, and Jensen saw the cartridge, hand-loaded, the bullet's copper jacket inscribed with symbols that predated metallurgy. Consecrated rounds. Blackwater fired again, this shot taking the creature in what approximated a shoulder. My grandfather made these in 1911, after the last time white men tried to build through this country. Copper mined from sacred ground, blessed in ceremonies your priests wouldn't recognize, loaded with powder mixed with ash from ceremonial fires. The old ones screamed, a sound that combined human agony with something far older, the cry of a thing that had ruled this territory since the glaciers retreated and now faced a weapon it couldn't simply ignore. It dropped to all fours, movements suddenly more animal than human, and fled toward the river with speed that blurred its outline against the snow. Blackwater fired his third and final consecrated round into its retreating form, striking somewhere near the spine. The creature stumbled, caught itself, and vanished into the tree line, trailing black blood that steamed and hissed where it touched frozen ground. Jensen approached the blood trail with scientific precision, noting how the substance ate through snow like acid, how it carried a smell of deep ocean trenches and decomposition. Will it die? Eventually. Blackwater ejected the spent casing, catching it carefully and tucking it into his pocket as if the brass itself held value. Might take days, might take weeks. Kushtaka are hard to kill. That's why my people learn to coexist rather than hunt them. But yes, those rounds will poison it. It'll retreat to deep water, try to heal, and probably fail. Probably? Burke's voice carried the edge of a man who'd absorbed too much impossible reality in too short a time. Nothing's certain when you're fighting things that shouldn't exist. Blackwater turned to face the assembled soldiers, his expression carrying 40 generations of surviving in country that actively tried to kill you. But the old one knows now that we can hurt it, knows we have weapons it can't ignore. That changes the tactical situation. Captain Hardesty convened an emergency command meeting at 1600 hours. This time, with Blackwater seated at the table rather than standing at attention against the tent wall. The Tlingit Corporal's elevation from guide to advisor happened without formal discussion. When a man saves your entire unit with bullets his grandfather made 30 years ago, traditional military hierarchy becomes negotiable. Corporal Blackwater, your assessment of current threat levels. Hardesty's West Point precision had eroded into pragmatic command. Can we complete this highway, or are we fighting a war we can't win? You're fighting a war you don't understand, sir. Blackwater spread his hands on the table, palms down, in a gesture that might have been Tlingit or might have been universally human. The Kushtaka aren't animals. They're not even really alive in the way you think of life. They're manifestations. Spirits given form by this land's power, shaped by human fear and drowning deaths over thousands of years. You can kill their physical forms, but the territory itself will generate more unless you address the fundamental problem. Which is, Jensen asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. You're building a road through their hunting grounds without permission, without acknowledgement, without respect. Blackwater's gaze moved around the table, meeting each officer's eyes in turn. My people learned centuries ago, you don't just take from this land, you negotiate. You offer something in return. You establish protocols that both sides can live with. Hardesty leaned back in his chair, its wooden frame creaking in the heated tent. The United States Army doesn't negotiate with wildlife, Corporal. Then, the United States Army will keep losing men until this highway becomes a graveyard with a roadbed. Blackwater's tone carried no threat, just statement of fact. Or you let me try something that might actually work. The silence stretched long enough for Jensen to hear wind howling through the spruce forest, carrying sounds that might have been natural, or might have been voices calling names no one had spoken in weeks. What do you need? Hardesty's capitulation came wrapped in exhaustion and pragmatism. Blackwater's ceremony began at midnight on December 24th, Christmas Eve, in a place that had never heard of Christ. Jensen stood perimeter security with Burke and Greco, watching the Tlingit Corporal work at the river's edge with materials that had no place in military inventory. Salmon caught through the ice and ritually prepared, copper tokens inscribed with symbols, tobacco that had been grown and cured according to specifications that predated the Louisiana Purchase. The corporal spoke for 30 minutes in his ancestral language, his voice carrying across frozen water with unnatural clarity. Jensen couldn't understand the words, but he recognized the tone: negotiation, respect, acknowledgement of power and territory. An offering to something that had ruled this country when Jensen's ancestors were still dying of plague in European villages. The old one appeared at 0047 hours, rising from the river like a submarine surfacing, water streaming from fur that looked darker and more matted than before. Blackwater's consecrated rounds had done their work. The creature moved with obvious pain, favoring its left side where black blood still seeped from wounds that refused to close properly. It studied Blackwater with eyes that cycled through colors no natural animal possessed, and when it spoke, the voice carried less hostility than weary acknowledgement. You speak the old words. You remember the old ways. The Kushtaka's voice still borrowed from the dead, but now it used only one. An elderly Tlingit man whose accent matched Blackwater's, whose phrasing suggested generations of accumulated wisdom. Your grandfather wounded me in 1911. You wound me again in 1943. How many more generations before your people learn to simply stay away? The road will be built. Blackwater's response carried no apology, just honest assessment. More white men will come, with or without my guidance, with or without respect for your territory. But if you and I can reach understanding, perhaps they'll come in ways that don't require constant killing. The negotiation took 2 hours. Jensen listened from his position, understanding perhaps one word in 10, but recognizing the cadence of treaty making, of borders being established and protocols agreed upon. Blackwater offered things the Army didn't know it was giving: specific construction methods that would minimize river disruption, seasonal restrictions on certain activities, designated areas where human presence would remain permanently forbidden. In return, the Kushtaka would permit the highway's completion and passage of vehicles, would cease taking soldiers who respected the boundaries, would retreat to deeper wilderness where human expansion hadn't yet reached. And the men you've taken? Blackwater's question hung in the frozen air. Mitchell, Kowalski, Riley, Hendricks, the others. Gone. The old one's answer carried neither regret nor satisfaction, just acknowledgement of completed hunts. Return to the water, return to the land. Their bodies nourish the river. Their voices strengthen our ability to call. This is the price your people paid for ignorance. Consider it education. The creature began sinking back into the water, its massive form descending through ice that shouldn't have supported its weight and hadn't broken under its emergence. Before it vanished completely, it turned its attention to Jensen, recognition passing between predator and prey, between ancient power and modern soldier. Tell your commanders, the treaty holds as long as respect holds. But if your people forget, if they push too far, if they decide their machines and guns make them invincible, we'll be here. We've always been here. We'll be here when your empire falls and the forests reclaim your roads. Then it was gone, leaving only ripples in water that should have been frozen solid. The Alaska-Canada Highway was completed in April 1943, 8 months after construction began. Official records credit 11,000 American soldiers and 16,000 civilian contractors with its construction. Official records list 43 deaths during the project, accidents, exposure, equipment failures. No official record mentions the Kushtaka or the treaty negotiated on Christmas Eve or the specific construction modifications that Corporal Joseph Blackwater implemented without formal authorization. Technical Sergeant Carl Jensen received a commendation for exemplary leadership under adverse conditions and rotated back to the continental United States in June 1943. He spent the remainder of the war training combat engineers in Georgia, never discussing what he'd encountered in the Yukon, never explaining why he refused all postings that would have sent him back to Alaska or northern Canada. The highway stands today. 60,000 vehicles passing through annually, tourists and truckers moving between Alaska and the lower 48 without incident. The surrounding wilderness remains largely untouched, protected by a combination of federal designation and local understanding that some territories aren't meant for human expansion. Occasionally, drivers report seeing massive figures near the tree line, shadows that move on 2 legs, shapes that don't quite match any known animal. Search and rescue teams sometimes find vehicles abandoned near river crossings, their drivers vanished without trace or explanation. Local Tlingit communities maintain ceremonial practices at specific locations along the highway, offerings left at unmarked sites, words spoken in languages most Americans don't recognize. And in the depths of the Yukon winter, when temperatures drop to 40 below and ice locks the rivers solid, some people claim they hear voices calling from the darkness, familiar voices, trusted voices, voices of people they knew who died years or decades ago. The smart ones don't answer. The smart ones remember that this land had rulers long before humans arrived, and those rulers never truly surrendered their territory. They just learned to negotiate,